I've been looking forward to speaking with you today, Jeremy. Pink bands, because of you. Plus, you're going to be on our float this year. You're on the back of the truck, enthroned, celebrating union activism from 50 years ago.
Yes.
You led to a change through the trade union movement. Made the unions think about who they represented, and we were there for all our members. And you were the start of it.
Well, it's been now 50 years since the events that I was embroiled in 1973, and those events have continued to have a big impact on my life. I was living at Macquarie University in Robert Menzies College. I'd come out, I hadn't come out to my family, but I was attempting to liaise with gay people, have relationships, and I'd gone into a club called Capriccios in Oxford Street one Saturday night, where I ended up being assaulted. This took a couple of weeks for all of this to boil up in me, and I thought I can't tell anybody. I couldn't tell my parents, I couldn't tell anybody at the college, so I ended up attempting to take my own life, which led me to be placed in North Ryde Psychiatric Hospital and have treatment there. And my parents came down, and this is how they found out about the fact that I was gay. They responded to that very well in the circumstances, and they said all they really wanted me to be was happy, and they'd help to do that. However, when I attempted to go back into the college, the master of the college, the Reverend Alan Cole, who'd been a missionary in China, told me that a Chinese mask on the wall of my room that my father had given me after he'd been on a trip to Singapore, Satan had possessed me through it, and that I couldn't come back into the college unless I renounced my sexuality and get counselling from the Sydney Anglican Diocese, which of course still today opposes same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage. So this led to a bit of a contretemps, and being at the time 18 and less wise, maybe more wise than I am now, I decided to take my concerns to the student council to say I wasn't going to be allowed back in the college because of my sexuality. The college was still under construction at that time, with the Builders Labourers Federation representing the workers on the site. So that's where I got introduced to Jack Mundy, Joe Owens and Bob Pringle, who were all involved in the Builders Labourers Federation as part of its leadership at the time. And they took it to the guys on this, all guys on the site, and they said, well, it seems a bit cruel, a bit wrong not to let a guy in just because he's got a different sexuality. So they said, well, down tools in terms of this. This then became quite a case. It got into the media. The ABC interviewed me on This Day Tonight, Stuart Littlemore. The university reacted quite strenuously in support of the college. The question of whether the college could not permit people to come in for certain reasons was upheld by the university. They thought, yes, they could discriminate. So we got to a point where this was a pink ban imposed on the college. Ultimately, it didn't achieve me being put back in the college, neither did I really want to go. So it blew over after an investigation by the university, which upheld the college and castigated me for being such a terrible person. But that was the first time that a union had come out in support of gay rights anywhere in the world. And I'm proud of my part in it, but I'm prouder of the role that Jack Mundy, Joe Owens and Bob Pringle all played in rallying their union members in support of that. And I think that was a very significant thing to do in 1973. But it wasn't the only significant thing that union did either. I mean, they were in support of other social rights, and they were in support of course, the environment.
Given the image of a construction worker, the blue collar, it was quite a thing for that union to back in your rights.
Yes, yeah, and to even see that as an issue. After this had happened to me, when I was speaking with Meredith Bergman, she suggested that I look for my special branch file, apply for it. So I applied to get a copy of my special branch file, which is a thick wad of photocopied documents, and down in the one corner it says /refer to ASIO, and on this little card, which contained insignificant information. So I applied to ASIO as well, and after 6 or 7 months I received a letter back from someone in the Attorney General's department telling me that my ASIO file had been destroyed because I was no longer deemed to be a threat to national security. The only threat that I was to national security was the fact that I was gay. Now, I'm sure Jack would have had ASIO files and special branch files which were much thicker than mine, but given that that was the tenor of the times, that there was this police force which looked at everybody who was slightly off centre or not mainstream, it was quite significant that the BLF took these types of stances.
Yeah, but also you took the stance, you spoke out.
Yes.
And that's why you got a file.
Yes, that's correct. It's nonsensical, but anyway, someone was being paid money to go around and collect all of this rubbish
Threaten
information.
the social fabric.
That's threatening the social fabric, absolutely. After university, I had done a diploma of education, but I took a job at the Medical Journal of Australia, and from there, I started working in book publishing. We were covered by the then AJA and later the MEAA, so I was certainly part of that union in terms of that. And I also worked with what was called the Society of Editors, which was specifically book editors. I ended up being elected president of that particular little group. And one of the things I helped establish was the Graduate Diploma of Editing and Publishing at Macquarie University. In fact, that course has become significant in the training of book editors. One of the sorts of achievements that I like to think about have come because I wanted to be involved in these sorts of things as a result of what happened to me in 1973. I was promoted into management positions in publishing, so that kind of changed things, working mostly for American publishing companies who have ethics of their own or none, and later moved into rights management, working for Copyright Agency Limited, and then I took over the role of Executive Director of the Australian Society of Authors. I'd been a member of the Australian Society of Authors for years and years and years. I'm not only an editor but a writer. In doing this, I'd also completed my doctorate part-time while I was working, and when a position became available at the University of New England as a lecturer in writing, I applied and took that position. That meant then I was a member of the NTEU at the university, and I was there for 10 years until I retired. So that still was part and parcel of the path that happened from 1973.
Your life certainly took a different turn from what, when you were young, you thought it was going to take, eh?
Oh, yeah, it did.
Writing to...
And it's also meant that I've been involved with other events. In 2008, I was invited with Comrade McTubbs to go down to the University of Wollongong, where they were having a seminar on that was celebrating the 40 years since the Paris 1968 student riots there. At that time, my partner and I, Lloyd, got a new car. It was a Mercedes. So I drove over to Concord to pick up Jack. Jack comes down and says, "Oh, this is a fancy car." And we get in and I drive him down to Wollongong. We go to come back to Sydney, and he gets out to the car and says, "Might be fancy, but it's bloody comfortable." So, he'd have lunch with friends at the Haberfield Rowers Club. We were living in Haberfield, sitting at a table just across from him one day there, and he was talking about watermelon greens and the green greens. And he said, watermelon greens are green on the outside and they're red in the middle. And I was referring to certain people in the Greens at that time. A phrase which I continued to relish over the years, the thought of a watermelon green, but I know exactly what he was talking about at the time, yeah.
It's interesting how at the time the university locked in with the college, and Macquarie being a newer uni, you would have thought in that era, those years would have tried to be more progressive, but they were just washed with the same.
The Chancellor of the university at the time was a certain judge called Sir Garfield Barwick, who was not the most progressive of thinkers. So he put the Deputy Vice-Chancellor in charge of the inquiry that investigated these things. He was another justice, and he was also a Methodist lay preacher. In the panel that was set up, there were some staff members who were sitting on it. He didn't let anybody else speak. He just basically put me, like in a chair as you're sitting in the middle of a room, and harangued me and told me that I was all sorts of low life. I couldn't quite believe why I was being treated in this way. Basically, if I attempted to say anything, I was shouted down. There was this definite men's club attitude that was running Macquarie University, was running so many things, was running Australia at the time, until Whitlam government came at the end of 1972, and we're talking 1973. That was a big change to have a change of government like that, and it would have appalled, I think, these men who were very much thinking that this was how things should be and they were going to keep it like that. Things couldn't change and they knew best. Even at school, I joined the anti-Vietnam War group, and I was living in Goulburn at the time, and we used to have meetings on Saturday mornings in the Rotunda in Belmore Park and hold up our placards and be yelled at by people walking past. But that kind of helped me have views which were contrary to the mainstream in that sense. Another thing, in the middle of the Cultural Revolution in China, and there I am, at 15 or something, in Goulburn, I handwrite a letter and send it to Beijing, Peking as it was called there, saying, I'd like to know more about China and stuff. And lo and behold, 6 months later, this package arrives from Peking. It's got foreign language press books in English, Lenin, Mao, 6 little red books of Mao, an enormous poster of Mao, which I put up on my wall. My parents were going, oh no. To this day, I think there in the middle of a cultural revolution, and everything's supposed to be chaos, there's somebody reading a letter in English and responding and doing something. I'm thinking, that's quite an achievement, and it stays with me to this day. It's kind of the little things. In terms of the life that Lloyd and I have lived, what we found, like when it came to the same-sex plebiscite, people would say to us, oh, we're going to be voting for that because we know you, and it's the small things, that's what I mean. Whilst in 1974, I'd have been totally against the idea of marriage because that was
part of the establishment. You can't have that.
No. But we achieved 68% of Australians voting in favour of same-sex marriage, from a position like in 1973 where people were so totally against it. It was against the law for men. The Anglican Diocese of Sydney might think that that's a terrible thing and carry on about it, but I don't think they're 68% of the population, so they're not quite in a majority. And that's little things have rolled into significant changes in the way that we're perceived these days.
And back when you took a stand, it was a very brave thing to do.
Stupid, probably.
Brave, stupid. But it was. You had to be there as an individual, and then you got the support. You went through the student union, and then the BLF, Jack Mundy.
Yep.
It's like a wave. It built.
Yeah, and it gave me a lifelong admiration for the work of unions in terms of what they do and how they do it. Like my father supported me when he was told by the Reverend Alan Cole that this mask he'd given me had possessed me and Satan had entered me. Then basically he said he's a nut. And he had been a bomber pilot in World War II and flew Lancasters. When he died, I was going through the papers that he kept. There was a tiny little newspaper clipping that was basically said 50% of the bomber commander, which he was flying in, perished in World War II. And he was one of the ones who didn't. He was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. And it's from him, I think, that I'm aware that like I could have died when I attempted to. I very nearly did. But in the humility of survival, there's a perspective where you've got to look at how insignificant some things are and yet how much they can become to be meaningful and in the end of it quite significant. And that's kind of the point I've reached 50 years on.
It's like with anything, you have to go back and say, okay, there's still an issue, there's still issues with bullying in the workplace, poor treatment, careers still affected. It's changing, but there's still a lot more for us to do. We win marriage equality, but we've got to look at the working life and what happens to people.
Indeed. And we need to be thinking too that we should be a whole nation and recognising our 60,000 year history too, and acknowledging that.
We've been asked to walk together with our First Nation people in the referendum that's coming on the voice to Parliament.
Yes, and if we can join that past with our present and the future, we'll have achieved something which is really, really remarkable. And into that, our own struggles in terms of a recognition of LGBTQIA plus rights. We've got this wave of history that we need to embrace to be truly one nation and make that nation a nation for all of us.
Yes.